On today's Locked On Bucks, we get into a highly anticipated episode. I know at least for the two of us, hopefully for the audience as well. The full-on Khris Middleton appreciation show, not just how good he was in this series against the Indiana Pacers, the encouraging signs from Khris moving forward as well, but the career of Khris Middleton and just how important this man has been to the city of Milwaukee and the organization that is the Milwaukee Bucks. Camille and I get into all of it coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis, here with you each and every day, even in the off season. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can view us on YouTube as well, as some of you are doing on the live show today. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Camille, we had said we were going to do this. I don't know if we said it on the air on the show, but you and I had talked about this for a while of, man, this is long overdue. We did the Bobby Portis appreciation show. I'm not sure about the aging of that one, but we did the Bobby Portis appreciation show at the end of the year. But I can confidently say this one is going to age very, very well, and that is the full-on Khris Middleton appreciation show. Just taking a look back at the series against the Pacers, it was what I think it was 148 points that he finished with. The most points he scored in an individual series throughout his career. I don't know where this team would have been without Khris Middleton in that series against the Pacers. You know, it's funny in that we think back to that 2022 season where the Bucks did not have the chance to properly defend their title. I still believe, but there's no way to back this up. And there's, you know, who cares? It didn't happen is kind of the approach. But I do still believe, I don't know about you, if Khris Middleton's healthy in that playoff run, the Bucks are at least go to the finals and have a chance to be back-to-back champions. Giannis single-handedly carried that team to a Game 7 with the Boston Celtics. I know you had Damian Lillard for 4 of the games. He was clearly not 100%, especially in that last game. But as we heard from Dame about the timeline with the injury, it was, man, what else can go wrong for this team? What he was dealing with as the playoffs started. I think you can make an incredibly strong case. The Bucks went 6 games with a Pacers team that I do have some thoughts on in a second, entirely because of Khris Middleton.
Listen, like you said, where would this team be without Khris Middleton? Like, that is what actually gave me some confidence going into the series, thinking like, okay, we don't have Giannis, which is a big blow, but a healthy Khris with Dame, like, I think that's still enough talent to get you past the Pacers. As we ultimately saw, it wasn't in large part. I mean, Dame also had the injuries throughout the series, missing 2 games. So that is what it is. But Khris's performance in Game 3 in particular is one that is always going to stand out to me. We ended Tech File the week before that game, and I had my Khris Middleton jersey on, and I was like, just so you guys know, I was like, if ever there's a game where Khris Middleton is cooking, understand that I am at home going crazy. And the game where he has a career playoff game, I'm out and about. I'm listening to the game on the radio, listening to you and Dave. I'm watching it in a bar, like on the screen. I get back home and rewatch the entire game, even knowing the outcome, just to see the effort that Khris Middleton played with. And it goes beyond just his scoring ability, which in itself is something that this Bucks team needs. It's something that is needed in the league, period. But like, he is a shot creator. He can get to his shot. Like, he was leading the playoffs at a moment in time during that first round series in points per play in isolation. Like Khris was doing his job, and the way he's able to get to his shot, he takes his time. He's patient. There was an article, I believe, in the Athletic or the Journal Sentinel, about how different it looks when Khris takes over rather than when it's Giannis or Dame, because it looks different, but the outcome tends to be the same, and that's complete control over the game. And the way that he does it is just so much more subtle, less flashy than Dame and the long threes, a lot less flashy than, Giannis, and the consistent drive that he has. It's a lot of finesse. It's the mid-range. It's slowing down. It's getting teammates involved. It's beautiful. I love watching that type of basketball. I'm a 90s kid, so the mid-range is always going to have a special place in my heart.
And, I think a lot of times we understate just how consistent he has been throughout his career. Not you and I, but I think Bucks fans. Even last year, look, it wasn't a great series for anyone, but even last year in that series against the Miami Heat, Khris shot 41% on his threes, averaged 24 points per game, which I don't think there is anybody on this planet that can complain about Khris Middleton giving you 24 in a playoff series and shooting at that volume that he did. What he did in this series against the Pacers, we mentioned the raw production in terms of his points scored. And I suppose we can't mention that without saying, look, I know the Pacers are not viewed. I shouldn't even say viewed. They're not a good defense, right? But when you looked at this Bucks roster and you looked at the name of Damian Lillard, but again, you saw how he was impacted. In those 4 games, he scored 125 points in the series. So if he would have played the full series, would he have scored more than Khris? Probably. The efficiency was still relatively there for Dame. It just wasn't really the burst that you were seeing. And I think we would point to really one huge half for Damian Lillard for a lot of that. A pretty big first half in the second game as well. But for Khris to look at those numbers and know you have a Damian Lillard that is clearly not 100% of the way there. Outside of that roster, we kind of joked at times about the team that Giannis carried to a 7-game series with the Celtics in 2022. I don't mean this to disparage any of these players, but when you looked on the floor and you saw Khris Middleton flanked by Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, Malik Beasley, Pat Beverly, AJ Green for stretches, Andre Jackson Jr., Danilo Gallinari. I mean, there was one clear point of emphasis for that defense, and it was Khris Middleton. So for him to be able to do what he did, consistently sitting at that scoring average of about 24, 25 points per game, but efficiently 48% from the floor, 36% on his threes. To me, that is the most remarkable part of all of this. You're going to be able to find better performances by the numbers in terms of, man, this guy went supernova. I mean, look back to last year, what Jimmy Butler did, averaging just about 40 points a game against the Bucks and shooting 60% and 44%. But what Khris did, all things considered, where this team was at, still kind of figuring things out, not 100% of the way there on offense, clearly missing some big pieces, and knowing you're going to be the one seeing all the attention in this series, and to still do what he did, that to me was the most incredible part of this.
Yeah. The attention was on Khris. Like, he was the focal point, especially once Dame went down, and he was still able to perform. I mentioned it during the post-game episode after the season came to an end after Game 6, but Khris Middleton had career numbers in this playoff series. It was the second highest playoff field goal percentage. It's tied for the most points per game that he's ever had in a playoff series, playoff career high in rebounds. And he did this while averaging almost 39 minutes a game, which was his highest minutes per game in the playoffs since 2020, 2021. The only years where he had a higher field goal percentage was the 17-18 year where we played the Celtics, and he was completely nuclear in that series. He was shooting like almost 60% from the field in that series, which when I went back to look, I was like, my mind, I remembered him being like amazing in that one, but seeing the numbers, I just said, wow. And Khris Middleton's performance, like, I made a joke about it a little bit on Twitter because I was seeing people still saying like Khris got to go, so on and so forth after the playoffs. And I'm not saying this to be disrespectful, but I'm just going to put it on the table. a lot of people treat Khris Middleton like he's Tobias Harris, and I don't like that. Like, you know what I mean? Like Tobias Harris is getting paid almost $40 million a year, and in the playoffs this past season, he gave you what, 10 points a game? 9 points a game?
Zero in the closeout game too. And to back that up even further, I mean, I remember conversations about that in the summer of 2019, when they were both free agents. Khris Middleton signs for that deal. Tobias Harris signed for a similar deal. And there were actually people having conversations, unpacking and ignoring the fact that, look, the Bucks, even if they wanted to sign Tobias Harris instead, they couldn't, because it's not how it works. It's not, okay, we'll let Khris Middleton walk and we'll sign somebody else. You're over the cap. So you have to pay him to keep him, but also you want to pay him to keep him. Yeah. But I remember people telling me, I'd rather have Tobias Harris than Khris Middleton.
Yeah. And we've seen as time has gone on how that looks. I mean, different situations. Tobias is the third guy over there with Maxey emerging and everything like that. But like you mentioned, closeout game, you didn't get much from him. And from Khris in a closeout game, he had what was probably like one of his worst games of the series in the closeout. But yet and still, he was still able to provide for the team in some way, some shape, some form. So we know, like me and you know, and I hope the listeners can understand too, after this playoff series, at the very least, to give Khris Middleton his props for that. But also then, just as we continue on in this show, thinking about his role on the team going forward, and if there is still a role for him. I mean, there are some people who, of course, are saying like the Bucks need to get younger, they need to get more athletic. And I do agree with them needing to get more athletic. But I don't think that in order for them to do that, Khris Middleton leaving has to be part of like that solution. Like, I think you can get more athletic around Khris, or at least try to, around Khris, Dame, and Giannis. Like, that's the trio in itself, where it feels like these three guys are probably the ones on the roster who you're looking to keep, like, untouchable. Like, no matter the conversations this summer, let's see what we can build around the three of them, and see how we can get athletic around them. But I don't agree with Khris needing to be gone in order to achieve that.
So there's it's seemingly already split in the comments about what the Bucks should do. I don't even want to say what they should do with Khris Middleton, because I believe the assumption is, as long as he is under contract, he's here, right? Mm-hmm. There's the relationship with Giannis is a big piece of it. And I get Giannis is very tight with Drew Holiday, and we saw him traded. But I think the difference is the tricky part of this, which we should save for the other side of this break. So there are some tricky nuances to get into for the standing that Khris has within this team, and again, how he's viewed within his own fan base. It's always been one of the more curious cases that is out there in the league. So Camille and I will start to unpack all of that coming up after our break here on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest, whether it's big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you. So it's important that you let that out, especially to someone who is unbiased on your life. So today, I and Camille, we both want to say how we really feel about something. You may even be thinking the same thing. It's what we've already started the show with, and that is Khris Middleton. How good he is for this team. How much I can't wrap my head around the fact that he does not have a 100% approval rating. You can accuse me of being biased. I'm sure there's a component of that. But that is one of the things I struggle with in my sports life, is grappling with how Khris Middleton is viewed with this team. You may not use therapy for that, for whether or not you view Khris Middleton viewed properly, but therapy is there for other, bigger, more pressing needs. It can be different for everyone. Most of us have much larger problems than worrying about whether or not Khris Middleton or your favorite player on the team is viewed as properly as he should be. But the point is, it is important to get those things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online. It is designed to be flexible, and it is suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA and get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And we should also remind you of Locked On Sports Today. It's free. It's out there everywhere that you're viewing this, where you're viewing this this show right now. And look, You may be one of those that keeps on sports channels in the background just for background noise throughout your day, especially if you're the work from home type. But I guarantee you, if it's Fox Sports or ESPN, more often than not, you probably have to reach for the remote to turn down the volume. Well, you don't have to do that with Locked On Sports Today. It is free. It is 24/7 streaming. It's programmed for you every single day. We cover the biggest stories without all of that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, news, all of that streams 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I mentioned the comments already starting to be a little bit split here with Khris Middleton. Look, he's not getting traded. You never want to speak in absolutes, but I am 99% certain Khris Middleton will never be traded from the Bucks because of his relationship to Giannis, because of his importance here. And look, frankly, the fact that 34 and 22 are definitely hanging in the rafters, right? What, a year, whenever the earliest you can do it, whenever, a year after they are done playing basketball and no longer with the Bucks, those numbers are hanging immediately. I think you can make a strong case. You and I joked about it, but it was one of those jokes where you're not even really joking. They both deserve statues outside of the building. That's how important this duo has been. And I just think the whole story that you tell with Khris Middleton is obviously, there's a lot of things that go into it. A lot of chapters in the book that is Khris Middleton. I think perceived value is going to be a pretty big chapter in that, as you and I and others have struggled in really trying to champion that cause for him through the years, even within his own fan base. I think there's the connection to Giannis is a big piece of it. And the fact that this duo, more than anyone else, resurrected this franchise, right? I know Giannis gets all of the attention because rightfully so. He is one of the greatest players in the history of this sport, a two-time MVP, a finals MVP, what he did in the finals after that knee injury. I'm not here to knock Giannis. I've never done that, despite some of the rogue commenters that are out there. Giannis gets the attention, and you understand why. Khris Middleton does not get as much as he should get there because Giannis can't do it by himself. We saw that in 2022. Khris can't do it by himself. We've seen that throughout the years as well. But the point is, Giannis's ascension, sure, it's his mindset, it's his mentality, it's the work that he puts in. I hesitate to even use this word, but you know where I'm going. He needed a Robin, and Khris Middleton was the perfect Robin for him. What this duo has overseen, when you think about their time here in Milwaukee, to witness a 15-win team, the coaching changes, the instability, and seeing this organization rise from a laughingstock to a championship organization and a team that maybe their window is closing, but they have been a perennial, we can't rule this team out in terms of winning a championship. And Camille, I know we've talked about our Bucks history in the past. If I would have found you as a 10-year-old and told you, hey, you know, the Bucks are going to win a title and they are going to constantly be in that conversation, you would have told me I was crazy and not listened to anything I ever said. I would have said the same thing to myself at 9, 10, 15 years old, even 20. But that's where this duo has really taken this team to. It's not just the two of them, but they're the biggest piece of why the Bucks are currently where they are.
It's not just the two of them, but the two of them are the only constants that we have seen over the last 10 years on this team. Like you think about Giannis's rookie year, that was also Chris's first year here in Milwaukee. So a lot of what I think about with this era of Bucks basketball is the two of them together. I think about the growth that we've seen from the two of them. Like the year where we had Brandon Knight and we ended up trading Knight for Michael Carter-Williams and the team went on like that slump. It just was not clicking for them. Things where it's like they really need to win in the worst way. And they had the Miami Heat game and Khris Middleton takes the game winner, knocks it down. The whole team is celebrating. Like that moment really stood out to me just in young Khris, like his time here with the Bucks, where it was like, man, he is not scared of that shot. And that's something that I've seen with him over the years with his growth as well, where it's like there were times when he was younger and he'd have a bad shooting game and he would stop shooting. Like he just is going to move the ball. He's going to pass it. And as he got older and started understanding his role in the team as like a primary shot creator, the shot might not be going in, but he's still trying to get to his spots, take high quality shots. And he's not letting necessarily the outcome dictate like, okay, I'm going to get scared of the moment. Like Khris is always up for the moment. And that's one thing that I love about his game. Now, I see some of the comments coming in saying like, how can you build around a part-time player, so on and so forth. Khris only plays 40 games a year. He's a turnover machine, so on and so forth. Khris Middleton only averages a little over 2 turnovers a game. This particular season, it's been around that 2.5 mark for the past couple of years for Khris.
I mean, it's been around that mark basically his entire time here in Milwaukee. And you know, what if I were to tell you his turnover numbers this year and last year were dramatically lower than they were the years that the Bucks were in the conference finals and won a championship?
They might not believe you. They might not believe you. And I think it's in part because when Khris does turn the ball over, it's normally like, this is a really bad turnover.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
It looks bad. And I think because of how it looks, people add another 2 turnovers to each 1 turnover that he has. But he is good with the ball in that sense. Like you don't necessarily want him to be your point guard, but he is a great off-ball option. He can initiate the offense. He has a great intelligence as well as in regards to the health aspect of it. He played 55 games this year, and he was on pace for more of that until, again, you can't help somebody putting their foot underneath you when you're coming down to land. Like that's one of those injuries where it's like, even when he tore his hamstring, it was a wet spot. Like there are some injuries for Khris Middleton where you're like, that's just unfortunate. And I hate to see it go this way, but Khris was in pretty good health this year. Like last year for sure. That was tough. He was dealing with a lot of different things, only played like 33 games. The year before that, he was playing at least 60, 65 games going back. So like, I can hear you on that. And then the piece with this particular Bucks team with this Dame trade is that you want for them to develop that continuity, which is why this off season is going to be very, very important because they didn't have a lot of time this particular season under Doc to try to figure that out. But that's why an off season with a head coach already in place, with you understanding who your teammates are probably going to be, this is the top of the roster. You can work on that now. So like I expect them when they hit training camp and they head into next season for the offense to flow a lot more better with them understanding how the 3-man game will actually work between Giannis and Khris and Dame.
I mean, that's the thing that I keep coming back to. I understand the comments that are out there about, look, I mean, this is a different conversation as we pivot in our upcoming shows about the Bucks offseason and about looking at some other teams that are out there. I understand if the pushback is, man, look at the Timberwolves, look at the Thunder, look at these other teams, look at youth is being served in these playoffs. I get that. The Bucks don't have youth, right? And I mean, if you want youth, that's fine, but you have to understand it means you're not going to have Dame, you're not going to have Giannis, you're not going to have Khris Middleton, you're not going to be competing for a championship in the next handful of years. It doesn't work that way. That if you want a full-on youth movement, it means you're rebuilding. And the Oklahoma City Thunder didn't start a rebuild and overnight become contenders. It got there quicker than I think we imagined by a year or two, but think back to the Thunder 2-3 years ago. You know, this is a process. Same with the Minnesota Timberwolves, same with all these teams that we're targeting and saying, man, it would be nice to be like them. I don't disagree, but that's going to have to wait for the Bucks. It is not the time to do that. And I think the biggest disappointment of this playoffs is, you know, the coulda, woulda, shoulda component of it. We don't have a definitive answer on. Would the Bucks beat the Pacers if Giannis and Dame were healthy? I think so, but we'll never be able to answer that. Would they beat the Knicks or whoever it is? If maybe in an alternate universe, it's the 76ers in the second round. Again, I think so if this team is healthy, but we're never going to be able to answer that. And the tough part of all of this is you saw Damian Lillard, not 100%, still give you large swatches of what you were envisioning in the playoffs. You saw Khris Middleton do what we were thinking, man, as the third man on that team. When you have the Giannis and Dame 2-man game, and oh, by the way, Khris is the third option. Well, you saw him doing what he was doing, granted against not a great defense, but as the main focal point. And it's hard not to envision, okay, this works. You just need to be lucky and you need to be healthy. And the Bucks just haven't had that the last 2 years.
Yeah, they haven't. And the reality of it is as well, like, let's say that the Bucks do run back next year, which I think both me and you expect them to with Dame and Chris and with Giannis. Like, the understanding here is that the window under contract with this group of stars, it's not that much longer that they actually have with this threesome here. Like, you have Chris under contract next year, and he has the player option. And then after that, he's a free agent. So, like, it's the contract was very short that he re-signed with. I believe Dame's contract is also up in 2026 as well. So, like, the window here of thinking about, like, okay, we want youth, we want athleticism. How can you add athleticism around the three of these guys? Because based on the contract situation, like, this is the core that you're rocking with here. Like, unless you're looking to blow it up completely, which doesn't seem like something that will happen, at least at this point. If next year they flame out, who knows what the conversation is at that point. But this summer, like, it doesn't feel like the time to say, like, this is it. It's not going to work. It has to get younger. And I think it was Giannis in his exit interview this season where he mentioned, like, I'm hearing people saying, like, we need to get younger, we need to get more athletic. And he's like, is pretty much like, do you have to get younger in order to be more athletic? Or can you find some guys who might not be on their first contract, maybe second contract, something like that, a little bit younger, maybe, but just athletic that can fit around what they're trying to build here?
You mentioned the comments, and what we should do. I don't want to take away from what the intention of this show was. We'll save some of those contract discussions and everything else for a couple of shows we're doing later in this week as we start to take a look at what we know now for the offseason. But some of those comments from Khris Middleton, there was one that really stood out to me, and it kind of ties into some of the comments that we're seeing from quite a bit of the listeners here. So we'll play that coming up here after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, hard to believe Mother's Day is already this weekend. It is already here. You may not have a gift for mom yet, especially that perfect gift. And if you may think, well, where am I going to get it? It has to be timely. It has to be quick. I need to get this rapid for mom, and it has to be exactly what she is looking for. What if I were to tell you that's where DoorDash comes into play? Moms are a gift, so give her the best gift of all this Mother's Day. You can get gifts as thoughtful as she is with DoorDash. You select from hundreds of expertly crafted bouquets to the best of tech, to self-care essentials, and more. And it all gets delivered right to her door. Maybe mom has a sweet tooth. She might be a tech enthusiast, a beauty connoisseur, or she's just outdoorsy. No matter what it is she is into, you can make her smile with a fruit or flower bouquet, makeup, tech, gear, workout equipment, and more. All of that you can get through DoorDash. Shop with savings that would make her proud. With a DoorDash Pass membership, you'll save with a $0 delivery fee and reduced service fees on eligible orders from DoorDash merchants that meet the minimum subtotal. Other fees apply. Terms apply as well. So get all of the gifts that mom is looking for on Mother's Day in one place, and get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with the code LOCKEDONNBA. That is LOCKEDONNBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. All right, Khris Middleton, Camille, after the game, I think one of the things that stood out to me, it kind of ties into a lot of the comments that we've seen trickle in here about Chris's availability and being a part-time player. I'm not here to dispute that it was frustrating. I know it was. It was for all of us during the course of the regular season when you would wonder, is Khris going to play in this game? It's a back-to-back. It's 3 games in 5 days. How many games is he going to see? It wasn't, as you pointed out, a 40 games player. He played 55, which is just below what you would need to be in order to be eligible for all NBA awards and individual honors. So I think that is worth pointing out. But Khris himself talked about the plan. And I think this is ultimately going to be the challenge for the Bucks next season, not just with Khris Middleton. Maybe it's going to be applied to others, but that was the way he approached this season. and the plan that the medical team put in place for
I think the medical staff did a great job of taking care of me, coming off my surgery from the summertime. I was frustrated with, the minute progressions and, not playing back-to-backs, but they knew what was going to be best for myself and my body. So, in all be all, I'm extremely happy the way, they managed my body just to get me to this point to where I can play 40 minutes and, feel great the next day or good enough to keep going. So, major shout out and thanks to them for that.
I mean, that's the biggest thing that we have to point out. Frustrating, sure. I would love for Khris Middleton to be able to play every single game. I mean, we're already 6 years removed from when that was the norm for Khris. He played all 82 games in the year prior to Bud arriving, only missed 5 games in Bud's first year. I think it was 4 or 5 games that he missed in the championship season. So he had been pretty much an Iron Man up until the year after the championship, when, again, I think a lot goes into that. It's not as simple as just the injury in that series against the Chicago Bulls. You think back to, and we've talked about this at length before, you have the start and stop component with, obviously a pandemic taking place, but the bubble and everything else. The Bucks weren't the only team that dealt with that. I'm not trying to suggest that, but an awkward year in terms of getting your body right and everything else, where these are guys that like schedules and structure and leaning on familiarities. That was gone for all of us, outside of the workplace, but it was gone for this particular aspect. Then you start up the new season, 2 months later? Or 2 months you're starting training camp, so not a whole lot of time off. You roll into the new season. The Bucks do win the championship, but that season ends in July. 2 days after that, Khris Middleton gets on a plane, goes to Japan, plays in the Olympics, comes home, gets a month off. Then the new season starts. Then you go into that season. He plays throughout that full season. Then he injures himself, and his offseason is spent rehabbing not 1 but 2 injuries, and that carries into the next season. And again, another offseason of rehabbing. So the other thing that he mentioned was, this is the first time in a while that I'm healthy and I got nothing to do in the offseason. It's not going to play in the Olympics. It's not dealing with a shorter offseason. It's not rehabbing. Everything is wide open. I feel great, and I don't have to deal with those things. I understand there are questions about the age and the injuries that he has faced, but I'd much rather enter the offseason seeing what I saw from Khris Middleton and knowing, look, that's probably going to be the approach next year for Khris too. He's probably going to play in around 55 games because of how available and ready he was for the playoffs. But there's no rehab going on. There's no long season that he's dealing with. He said his body feels great. And I think the other big part of it is, not just Khris, but is this something that the Bucks should apply to other players on the team? As much as we may not want to see it and hear it, is it something that you need to do with Giannis too? We know Giannis wants to play in every single game, and Damian Lillard, but do we see more of that? All right, this is going to be a designated rest day for these guys, because as we've seen for the last, every year but that title year, and for the last 6 years, every year but that title year, even before winning the title, if you're not healthy, you're not going to win it.
Yeah, that's one of the things you need. You need health. You need to be good for sure, but you need a little injury luck as well to go on your side. And with Khris and the idea of thinking about what next season might look like with the minutes load and the games played, that's really interesting to consider, because, you heard this team talk so much about how they were waiting to get to April to May for that basketball to start. And you have to be smart. We even heard Doc Rivers mentioning, I love heroes. I just don't love them in February. I love heroes in May and June, playing through injuries when it's the playoffs. Cool. But during the regular season, we need to find a proper balance. And that's something that could come into consideration for this Bucks team, not even just with Khris, with Giannis as well. Although I loved his comment where he's like, maybe I rest. But then again, just because I rested in March does not mean I won't be injured come May, which is true. You never know. This is all just trying to be as preventative as possible. Someone might point to the Knicks and say, maybe you should. That's the other extreme way to go, where they're saying we're in condition to play because all we do is play 42 minutes a game in the regular season. But I think with Khris at this stage of his career, because there are questions about like his health and, what he can do, so on and so forth. And one, I feel like the Pacers series did answer some questions about that, but it also shows like if it was just Giannis and Khris and that was it, like that was the duo, and those were your two stars, like then I think the concerns might be a little bit higher. But given the fact that it's a trio with Giannis and Dame and Khris, I think that takes some stuff off of Chris's plate as well. Again, it's assuming health, but the hierarchy is a little bit different here, where it's not like we need Khris to be supernova, have a chance to win, because if Giannis is out, it's just on you. Like the idea is that maybe if you are resting, maybe you can get 2 out of 3, whatever the case may be. But the workload, ideally, you're thinking like it's not going to be as heavy on Chris's back because there are 2 other superstars there to share the load with him. And that was what got me really excited about Khris Middleton with Dame coming onto this team, was thinking about all of the secondary actions and how much was going to be opened up for him based on the gravity of Dame and of Giannis and what they can do together and how that's going to open up things for Khris. And we didn't get to see that completely this season. Wasn't something that necessarily was hammered by Adrian Griffin during his time here. A lot more free-flowing basketball on offense. And Doc was really trying to get that 2-man game of Dame and Giannis together when he took over, especially once Khris went out. So just thinking about what that might look like from him on the second side, or that third action when it gets to Khris. Like, you're focusing so much on Dame and on Giannis, and then oops, we left Khris Middleton open in the corner, or oops, Khris is open on the wing, and he's smart enough to make the right play out of that every single time.
Yeah, and look, I see a lot of these are probably best to save for more of the offseason outlook shows. But I mean, the big thing I would point to is the last point you made is what I was kind of mentioning throughout the course of the season, and why I think even though the results are not what you hoped for, as much as we love Drew Holiday, it was a trade the Bucks had to make. I think we'd be having the same conversation if the trade wasn't made. Would your defense be in a better spot? Sure. But your offense, absolutely not. And that's ultimately, that is what would have put more pressure than anything on Khris Middleton. It's not to say Drew Holiday is not a good offensive player, but is he a guy that you can say, okay, when teams are going to key in on Giannis in the half court in the playoffs, we need somebody that can start to cook, that can hit shots and take over. That's just not Drew Holiday. And if that's what you went in with it, your defense would be better. Look, you need a good defense to win a championship.
Thanks.
That's the lesson we've learned for 6+ years now. But your offense would still just not be good enough. And more than that, it puts an immense amount of responsibility and pressure on Khris Middleton. And if he is as unreliable as I am led to believe by half of these comments, then you're in a world of trouble if that's the case. The other part of it is, look, if you're suggesting trading Khris Middleton, I don't know what the deal is. Number one, if he's as old, slow, and bad as I'm led to believe by some of the comments, then what is the return that you're going to net on Khris Middleton? But also, just take a landscape of the league. Where's the team that Khris Middleton is the missing piece? And that may sound as if it's negativity towards Khris Middleton of, well, we love him, but is he that good? No, it relies on fit. And we know that fit is there with Giannis. We know there's that comfort and familiarity, that second nature chemistry that we've seen. For whatever reason, Khris Middleton is still the only player on this team that can throw an entry pass to Giannis and has that second nature connection with him. But I just don't know what the team is that's out there that says, hey, Khris Middleton, with 1 year left and a player option, that's the guy we need to give something up for, to trade for.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying just goes to the fact a little bit more that his highest value just might be here in Milwaukee. Like it just might be here, just based on familiarity with the system, with Giannis, so on and so forth. But one last point about Khris, because I've talked about the offense and the shot creation. I've talked about the playmaking and how important he is, even with the bench units as well. But the defense. So when he was coming back from the injuries, like one of the things I noticed immediately, not this particular season, but like last year, was like the lateral quickness looks a lot less quick with Khris, which is expected as you continue to get older. There were injuries, of course, as well. So then my hope with Khris defensively was like, hey, He's smart enough to be a good defender in a team concept. You don't want him to end up on islands necessarily, but he is still 6'8", 6'9". Like, he has some length, smart, can be a good team defender still. In this particular season, seeing him a bit healthier, he was moving pretty well. Not saying he was moving like he was, during the championship run or before that, but he looked better defensively than what I was seeing from him prior to that. And him having a summer again where he doesn't have to focus on rehab and he can just focus on what the team concepts are, where his spots are going to be on the court, him just working on improving his game. Because when you're having a rehab summer, that's your focus. It's just trying to get back onto the court, not when I get back on the court, what can I add to my game? And that's what he's going to have the chance to do this summer as well. So I'm glad that we got a chance to do a Khris Middleton appreciation episode, because the man deserves it. The jersey's definitely going up in the Raptors. I said that Raptor championship, it's solidified. 22 is up there, but this playoff series against the Pacers, I do think did open the eyes for some people who were harsh on Khris and his value to say, wow, at the very least, they can admit that man had a good series against the Pacers, and without him, who knows where the Bucks would have been.
I think the big takeaways are this, and Aaron pointed out too. I mean, it's everything off the court, the injuries, the rehabs. He loses his dad. Frank and I talked about this on one of the post games too. Was I thought he looked a lot better defensively in this series than I anticipated. And I think the big piece of it is, when we talk about the core and how the Bucks have to move forward, you don't trade one of those three guys when this is what we have that we know we can lean on. The rest is uncertainty. Brook Lopez I think is still good and still valuable. I talked about this before. I think a lot of the arrows that Brook Lopez can catch are a lot of times due to who you're surrounding him with on the floor. But Giannis is a two-way player. You saw those moments from Damian Lillard. Granted, not to the volume you anticipated in the regular season, but you saw it in the playoffs, and he himself talked about everything he was dealing with and said, I think people are going to be surprised when they see me next year, and that's in the rearview mirror. And, this series reaffirmed everything on Khris Middleton. So those are what The rest of it is the uncertainty. And to me, for a team whose window is starting to close, if not next year is it, that's not what you tinker with. That's what you keep. It's everything on the edges that you say, okay, this is our last shot or one of our last shots. Here's how we have to evolve and kind of get better on the edges. So that's going to be the challenge for this front office in the off season here. And look, the other thing you can mention teams too, Orlando, Houston, Oklahoma City. Those are teams that need some scoring and would have an interest in Khris Middleton. I mean, maybe, but I don't know about you, Camille. I don't see the Orlando Magic doing that. I know they need scoring, but Paolo Banchero basically plays that role, and they got a lot of cap room. So do the Oklahoma City Thunder, not to mention a very young team already with some players at that position that they're more eyeing of, do we sign Paul George? Do we think we can get him and things like that? And it's kind of same story for the Houston Rockets too, with Ime Udoka and the style of play that he wants to play. So it's not just as easy as looking, well, this team struggled, so trade Khris Middleton there. To me, that's the big piece of it, is those three guys are your core. And it's not to say you got to trade everybody else, but to me, those are the three guys that are here. As long as Giannis is here, those are the three guys you're keeping here. They've proven their value. It's everything else that you have to examine of, how do we get better? How do we add more defense? How do we add more athleticism? How do we add more youth around those guys? Because if we have enough of it, we're not going to be this older, slower, plodding team.
Agreed. Yeah, you said that beautifully. I think that is exactly, that's my tweet said, after the season closed, Khris, Giannis, Dame, those are the three that you keep and you try to find ways to retool around them in the offseason. The question becomes, well, what pieces on the Bucks can you use to actually upgrade the roster? And that is a very good question, and something that I look forward to us having conversations about throughout the offseason about different options for the Bucks.
I have a feeling we are going to do it several times over.
Oh, for sure.
Off season and looking at what can the Bucks do? Where do they go from here? What are some players to target? So as we get closer to free agency, we'll certainly do that. As we get closer to the draft, we'll keep our eyes open for some mock drafts and names that are being linked to the Bucks. But this one was all about Khris Middleton. Well-deserved, and it's been a decade of that for Khris Middleton, of consistency and reliability from Khris, and especially in this postseason series against the Indiana Pacers. So stay tuned as we start to get into our offseason outlooks for the Bucks. I should also mention I've only owned 2 Bucks jerseys in my entire lifetime. One was Glenn Robinson, because I think Frank and I have talked about this before. He was always my guy. I was a big dog guy. History may not be on my side in the Glenn Robinson versus Ray Allen debate, but I was always a Glenn Robinson guy. That was the second jersey I ever owned in my lifetime, behind a Charles Barkley Suns jersey. But that was it. And so 3, I suppose. But I did not make another addition to the wardrobe until the summer of 2021. And I haven't worn it, but it hangs. And that is a Khris Middleton jersey, because when you looked at what he did against the Atlanta Hawks, the full body of work that he has done throughout his career, and even this year, when you look at what Khris has done, I felt like, if they beat the Hawks, and if Khris Middleton has a big piece to do with this, I got to do something to celebrate this. And not only did he have a big piece, he was tremendous in those final 2 closeout games, carried it into the series against the Suns as well. So I promptly got myself a Khris Middleton jersey. That is the only other jersey I have owned of the Milwaukee Bucks in 25, 30 years of gaps between those two. So I think there's a lot of people that probably have a pretty similar story to me about Khris Middleton there. So this was a fun one to do. And as we said, very, very, very much deserved for Khris. Later in the week, we're going to start to get into some of the offseason outlooks for this team. Frank has gone over high-level looks at the cap situation the Bucks are in. We'll save all of the advanced looks at that for Frank when we get him back on to dig into the cap minutia. But we'll start to paint the high-level picture for the Bucks and some of those things we touched on. If you keep those 3 guys, what are some of the pivots that you make? So look for that in the coming days here this week on Locked On Bucks. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.